going to go ahead and start that recording.
Karen, I'm
yes.
sorry, when you record, can you make sure it's in the speaker mode and not in the gallery mode?
Sure. Yep. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. There will be opportunities for questions, and you can also post a question or ask a question during the session. And Rabbi Riemer is going to spend a little bit of time in the beginning talking about, yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and start.
Let me be very honest with you.
Rabbi, I'm going to mute and then you unmute yourself.
Is this it? Am I on now?
Yes.
I hit on mute.
Yes, you're on. Everybody can hear you, Rabbi.
Okay, can I start?
Yes, please.
Let me be very honest. The truth is, I really don't know what I should do tonight. There's something almost bizarre about doing what we intended to do. Here we are sitting in the comfort of our homes, Clearwater, Boca, getting ready to study a love story that has a number of funny lines in it. And meantime, while we're sitting here, more than 1,600 missiles have gone off, not only in Sderot, not only in the south of Israel, but in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Bat Yam, and Jerusalem. And Israeli soldiers are being called up, and the news at 5 o'clock, 2 hours ago, was that Israel has moved into Gaza. The situation is very tense. So I'm not sure whether we should study a love story tonight, or whether we should spend this time thinking and talking and praying about what we can do. But make no mistake about it, Hamas is not just interested in killing Israelis. Hamas is after all of us. Look at their website and you'll see who's responsible for the pandemic, the Jews. Who's responsible for the unemployment rate? The Jews. Who controls the media and owns the banks? The Jews. And so I really couldn't make up my mind what to talk about. And let me offer you this compromise. I'm going to read you just one brief letter that I got from Israel today. So you'll have some idea of what's going on. And then I'll give the talk that I prepared. Because I don't want anybody who came in expecting to hear a love story feeling disappointed and asking for a refund. And then if you want to, it's up to you. I'll come back on any other day that you choose, any day next week or any day. And I'll try to talk about what's happening in Israel and why, and maybe even study a page of the Bible that deals with what's going on here right now. Is that a fair compromise? Okay.
Yes.
The letter I'm going to read comes from Rabbi Wesley Gardenswartz. He's the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in Newton, Massachusetts. His wife is Shira Goodman, who is the CEO of Staples. They went to Israel last week in order to attend the wedding of Shira's nephew and in order to visit Shira's father. Shira's father, you may know, was Rabbi Arnold Goodman, who was a rabbi in Atlanta until he retired and moved to Israel. And this is the email that he sent last night to the members of his congregation. Last night, Shira, her brother, our father, and I took Yeshayahu, the bridegroom, out for a pre-wedding ceremony celebratory dinner at a steakhouse in Jerusalem. This is going to be our opportunity to stop and celebrate this moment. It was the last night of his life when Yeshaya would be a unit of one. Tomorrow he would get married and be part of a unit of two. We ordered a bottle of Merlot and we went around the table and each one spoke about how much we love Yeshua. He's really a very impressive person. Honor graduate of the Technion. He has humility and humor. And people talked about his kindness and his caring. My father-in-law, that's what he calls his father-in-law, who is usually calm, broke out into tears when he talked to the many times that Yeshayahu has taken care of him and taken care of his grandmother when she needed help. We toasted his future with Adi, and we ate and drank a perfect night. And then Yeshaya's cell phone rang. It was his fiancée, Adi. Excuse me, he said, I have to take this call. And he left the table. A few minutes later, he came back and his face was pale. We're not going to get married tomorrow. I've been called up. But Adi says, we've got to be strong. The waiter came and said, can I interest you in dessert? And we said, no dessert, thank you, just the check. They'd already postponed their wedding once because of COVID. Now the second time because of the call-up. The wedding is tentatively rescheduled for someday in June, but who knows? Yeshaya is in the infantry. And so tonight we're going to drive to Haifa to be with Adi and her parents and her brothers. And tomorrow will not be the wonderful wedding we thought it would be, but it'll be a night of love and strength. And that's what it's like to be in Israel today. You've got to be prepared every day. Isn't that a powerful letter? Imagine being called up Erev your wedding. That's how Israelis live. I want to say a couple of things before we begin our Bible study today. The first is a clue on how to read the Bible. When you read the Bible, you got to pay careful attention, not only to what is being said, but to what is not being said. You have to ask yourself, why does this person who's asked a question and who could answer yes or no, or could make a joke or could cry, says nothing? What lies behind the silence? The reason I'm asking this question is because the woman we're going to study tonight barely talks in the whole story. The second thing I want to tell you, remember, we played a game last Monday. We studied the story of David and Bathsheba in the Bible, in the Talmud, in modern literature, in Washington. And every time I asked you the same question. According to this version, who's the hero and who's the villain? Do you remember that game we played? Some people voted for Nathan because he had the courage to stand up to the king and criticize him. Not many people then or now would have the courage to do that. And some people voted for David because he had the courage to admit he did wrong. How many leaders do you know, past or present, who would have the honesty to say, I did it and I was wrong and I'm sorry and I apologize? And some people voted for Uriah because he chose to die in battle rather than shame and disgrace his wife and his king. But did you notice there was one person in the story that nobody voted for? Did you know? Bathsheba. She seemed to us to be an innocent, gullible character, like a prop in somebody else's story. And so we dismissed her. None of us thought she was either a hero or a villain. But tonight I want to study the same story once again from her point of view. And one more thing I have to say before I begin. I want to make a confession. I confess I do not understand women. I really don't. I've read books about women. I've read essays about women. I've gone to movies about women. I don't understand women. And I'm probably not the only person in this room who doesn't understand women. Let me ask the men who are here. Has this ever happened to you? You go out with a woman and she seems demure and cultured and refined. And then a week later, you happen to meet her, you happen to bump into her when she's having a fight with one of her friends. And this woman who seemed so demure and so refined when she was out on a date with you, opens her mouth and swears like a fish wife. And when you see that, you're bewildered. You say, is this the same woman that I was out on a date a few days ago? Or has this ever happened to you? You go out with a woman and she seems cultured, beautifully dressed. Her hair is just right. Her makeup is just perfect. And you come by a few days later and she's painting her dorm room and she's wearing torn jeans and a sloppy t-shirt and she has no makeup and her hair is a mess and she looks 10 years older than she did when you went out with her. And you say to her, is this the same woman that I went out with or not? The reason I ask you this question is because we're going to study Bathsheba tonight. And I really admit from the start, I don't know who the real Bathsheba is. A case can be made that she's a gullible, trusting, naive woman whom powerful men take advantage of. Or a case can be made that she's smart, smarter than they are, and that she only pretends to be dumb so as to fool these men and get them to do what she wants. Who's the real Bathsheba? I don't know. But let me suggest that if she is really smarter than she seems, and if it's true that she hides your brains, if that's true, she's not the only woman in history to do that. And therefore, we have to ask, why does she do it? Because if we can figure out why Bathsheba does it, we may be able to understand why a number of other women that we know do the same thing. We may understand why a number of women we meet in the Bible and a number of women whom we know today work behind the scenes and hide their brains. So let me study with you tonight 2 or 3 scenes in which Bathsheba appears. And let me show you how each of these stories can be read 2 ways. She can be read as a manipulator or as one who is manipulated. And I'll let you decide which version do you think is the most accurate. Okay? I've taught the story of David and Bathsheba many times. Sometimes I teach you from the point of view of David, sometimes from the point of view of Nathan, sometimes the point of view of Uriah. I've never before tonight taught this story from the point of view of Bathsheba. You remember the plot. David sends his soldiers off to war. Instead of leading them, he sits home. He takes a nap in the afternoon, and then he goes for a walk on the roof. and he sees a woman bathing. And the Bible says this woman is very, very beautiful. Did she forget to pull down the shade? Did she do it on purpose? We don't know. But the king finds out who she is, and the king sends an invitation asking her to come to tea at the palace. And she accepts. You can't blame her for doing that, can you? If you got an invitation to have tea at number 10 Downing Street, or at the White House, or at the Dasha of Prime Minister Putin, you would accept, wouldn't you? I would. And when you got there, you remember I told you that a private conversation. And as a result of that conversation, he became pregnant. It happens. We have no reason to believe that it was her fault, do we? Maybe David spiked to the tea. That's what they say Bill Cosby did. Or maybe it was his idea, not hers. We don't know. And then a few months later, for the first time in the story, Bathsheba speaks. Up until now, in every line, he's been sending. Now she sends a message. And the message, at least as far as the Bible records it, consists of 2 words. I'm pregnant. Those are the only lines she gets to speak in the whole story. That's why a lot of people think she's just a prop in the David story and not a person with a mind of her own. Could be. Could be. But let me point out some loopholes in that story that I never thought of until this year. You know the story about the actress in Hollywood? Her agent comes and says, they're making a big movie about David and Bathsheba, and I think I can get you the role of Bathsheba. Aren't you excited? He says, no, thank you. I want a speaking part. How can you take seriously a woman who only gets 2 lines? But if you look more deeply into the story, you begin to think things you haven't noticed before. Number 1, how did she become pregnant? Did she forget to take her birth control pills with her when she went to the palace? If so, why didn't she take her morning after pill? Or if those devices had not been invented yet, why didn't she just tell her husband that the baby was his? And it happened to come a little bit late, 9 months, 10 months, who's counting? Or if she was afraid that he wouldn't believe her, why didn't she just have an abortion? That would have avoided the whole scandal. Did you ever notice those questions? Even if she's innocent in what happened, why did she tell the king? That set in motion a whole chain of events by which the king ended up having her husband killed in order to avoid a scandal. Why did she have to tell the king? Did she do it in order to trap him? Or did she do it out of innocence and confusion? I don't know. But the story can be understood either way. We never hear of Bathsheba again in the whole book of Samuel, but she pops up twice in the book of Kings. She pops up in the Midrash on Psalms, and if you remind me or coax me, maybe I'll tell you that Midrash, but not really on topic now, so I'm not going to tell it to you now. But she appears twice in the book of Kings. The first is in chapter 1. The king is old, and he's weak and feeble, and he shivers Nebuch in bed. And so they hire a girl from the countryside to take care of him, to nurse him, to keep him comfortable. Her name is Avishag the Shunammite. The great lover David is no longer able to make love. The dashing young hero of the book of Samuel's is now old and feeble and cold. He needs somebody to take care of him. And you can say about him what he once said about Saul. Eich naflu hagiborim. How have the mighty fallen? But Sheva walks into the room. And when she does, I don't know who I feel sorrier for. I feel sorry for Avishag, this girl from the countryside who's been taken without any question. They didn't ask her, they just took her to care for the king. She had to leave her village behind. She probably had to leave her boyfriend behind. And so I feel sorry for her. How did they persuade her to do it? The Yitzhak Munger, the great Yiddish poet, says they said to her, if you come and take care of the king, we'll give you a kapitel in the Tanakh. We'll give you a chapter in the Bible. Maybe, but I'm sure that she was homesick and that she missed the shepherd boy whom she loved. And I feel sorry for her. And I feel sorry for the king, once a great lover and whose body is now frail and whose mind is now weak. And I feel sorry for Bathsheba. She was once the love of his life. Now she has to see him shivering in bed in the arms of somebody else. And she has to wonder, why is he sleeping with her and not with me? But Bathsheba has not come into the room to look or to judge. She's come on a mission. She's heard that one of David's sons, the oldest, the one whom she calls Adoniyahu ben Haggit, has called a meeting in Harogel, and he's invited Joab, the head of the army, to this secret meeting. Notice two things. She doesn't call him Adoniyahu ben David. She calls him Adoniyahu ben Haggit, because in her mind, he's not David's son. He's the son of that no good Haggit, her rival in the harem, who wants to have her son be king instead of hers. And notice that he's called Joab to the gathering. Why? You read the papers, you know why. When anybody in this today or then wants to start a rebellion, the first thing you do is make sure you got the army on your side. If you don't have the army on your side, you better not start a rebellion. We just saw that in Riemer. And so he invites Joab, and Joab comes to the meeting because Joab, who has always been loyal to David, feels that David is just about to die, and there's no sense in being loyal to him anymore. And so he's going over to be with Adoniyahu. But Sheva comes in. She says, did you hear what happened? Adoniyahu is plotting to seize the throne. He's gathered a group in Harogel, and they're going to make a coup. And the first thing he's going to do when he takes the throne is he's going to kill your son Solomon, where Solomon is his big rival for the throne. Notice she calls him not my son, your son. He's going to kill your son because she wants to awaken his feelings of fatherhood. And David's groggy, and he's had a lot of memory loss. And she says, don't you remember? And he says, yeah, I guess so. But he doesn't really remember. She's taking care, it seems to me, of his memory loss to persuade him to do what she wants to. Or maybe not, maybe he made the promise. We don't know. The sentence could be read on either way. But just at that moment, just when she says, you remember the promise you made? In walks Nathan the prophet. And Nathan says, yeah, Bathsheba's right. I remember you told her, you told me, you appointed Solomon. Is it a coincidence that two of them arrive at the same time with the same story? Or did Nathan send Bathsheba in? Or did Bathsheba arrange for Nathan to come in? Who manipulated whom? We don't know. But I got a hunch somebody manipulated somebody. I think Bathsheba is probably the manipulator. How do I know? Nathan has the courage to go in and say to David at the beginning of the story, you're a murderer, you're an adulterer, you're a traitor, look what you did to Uriah. How did he know what David did to Uriah? How did he know what David and Bathsheba did? I'm sure it wasn't in the newspaper. How did Nathan know that David committed adultery? There were no witnesses there. Who do you think told him? Only one person could have told him, Bathsheba. She's the one who got him to confront David. And she's the one who gets him to come in now and back her up in the story. And if he gets the credit in the Bible and goes down as a hero, let him. She doesn't care who gets the credit. She only cares about getting her way. And so David, the two of them, David believes them, even though there's no proof. If I were appointing a successor, I would have a copy and I would have two witnesses and I would have it in the archives, wouldn't you? David has no proof, but the two of them say so, he believes this. Okay? And when the people that were plotting with Adoniah heard the news, David does the hardest thing that anybody can do. If you don't put, if you ever build up a big business and then it comes time to retire, that's tough. To turn your business over to somebody else and to watch how they run it. I know one president of a college built a college almost single-handedly and then almost destroyed it because he undermined his next three successors because they don't do it the way I did it. And that's what David is being asked to do, to retire, to let go of power, and to turn his power over to Solomon. But he does it. Tough to do, but Nathan says it's time. Nathan says it's time, Bathsheba says, all right, and he does it. And when the people around Adoniah heard the news, they head for the hills. They run. They suddenly remember they got another appointment somewhere else. They get out of there. And Yoav heads for the temple. And when he gets there, he takes hold of the horns of the altar, figuring that's sacred space. He'll be safe there. But he won't be. Solomon orders his soldiers to take Yoav down from the altar and execute him. And by doing that, he becomes the head of the country. David dies, but as the curtain falls on his life, Yoav is gone, Abner is gone, one character, Saul's gone. The only character still left standing is Bathsheba. She's going to sit at the side of her son and be his queen mother. In the Bible, she's ignored, in the Talmud, she's ignored, but she is the last one standing. And did he make that promise or not? We'll never know. The story can be read either way. Was she a docile, obedient tool of David? Was she a docile tool of Nathan? Or did she get what she wanted and fool them? And now we come to one more scene in the Bible. Solomon allows Adoniah to live, provided that he behaves, which means that David's police will keep an eye on him at all times. One day, Adoniah comes to Bathsheba. He figures she's not very smart. She's a woman. How smart can she be? David used her. Nathan used her. I'll use her. So he says to her, would you please do me a little favor? And then he says something so unbelievably stupid. By the way, you know, I was the one who really should have been king. But your son Solomon got the throne instead of me? No, okay. Is that a tactful thing to say to the queen mother? I should have been the king instead of your son? I think he's an idiot. But he says, do me a little favor. So she says, okay, what is it that you want me to do? He says, would you please go to the king and ask him to give me Avishag the Shunammite, who was my father's last concubine. Let him give him to me. Let him give him to me as my wife, because I love her. That's not because I want to claim on the throne. I love her. Why does he give that reason? Because he thinks Bathsheba is a woman, and women love stories. You know, these women, what do? They just read these magazines, TV magazines, movie magazines. They're interested in love stories. And so he gives her that reason. And what does Bathsheba do? She says one sentence, I will speak to the king, Elecha. Elecha can be read two ways, on your behalf or about you. And we don't know what that means. And I'm sure Yonadav Adoniyahu was too stupid to catch the two possible meanings. He goes to Solomon while he's at a cabinet meeting. Why? And she makes the request in front of them. Why? Because even if he was tempted to give in and give her her request, to do it in front of his court, of his advisors, would have been political suicide. They would never have respected him if he did such a stupid thing. Because if you give somebody the king's concubine, it's like giving him the palace. It's like giving him the throne. It's like saying, you're the king's inheritor. So she makes the request in public on purpose, knowing that he can't grant the request in public. And he says, why did you ask for Abishag? You might as well ask for the whole kingdom. That's what it means to give it to her. And no way am I going to do that. And then he turns to his officers and he says, this man is dangerous. Doesn't call him my half brother. This man is dangerous. No doubt about it. Take care of him. What does that mean? Doesn't call him his brother. He calls him this man and he says, take care of him. Did you ever watch The Godfather? The Godfather never says, kill so-and-so. He says, take care of him. And the person who gets the order knows what he means. But just in case there's a tape recorder around, just in case, Chas v'sholem, the police may get hold of it, he never says, kill him. He says, take care of him. And here, Solomon does the same thing. The officers hear the command. They do what they're told. Adoniah runs to the sanctuary, takes hold of the horns of the altar. He figured Yoav was saved by taking hold of the horns of the altar. Maybe I'll be saved too. But Solomon's soldiers drag him down from there and kill him. And is it Bathsheba's fault? No. All she did was do what Adoniah told her, asked her to do. He asked for a favor, she gave him a favor. She forgot to mention the part about he's in love with her. But she's either one of the dumbest women in the Bible or she's one of the smartest women in the Bible. And we don't know which. Let me point out a couple of women in the Bible, two women in the Bible, and some women today who have followed Bathsheba's example. First, Esther. Mordecai comes and you got to save the people. If you don't do it, nobody else can. She says to the king, would you come and have dinner with me and bring Haman? Why did she do that? I guess she figured, like many women do, the way to a man's heart is to his stomach. He prepares a meal and it turns out, no, it's not so good. He makes another meal. And in the middle of the meal, she says something weird. She says, Your Majesty, I know you're a busy man. And therefore, if we were only going to be sold into slavery, I wouldn't take your time. But since we're all going to be killed, every man, woman, and child, including me, because you may not know this, but I'm Jewish too. Since we're going to be wiped out, could I take a few minutes of your time and tell you what's going on? And the king is shocked. He never knew she was Jewish. He never knew that Haman had made such an order. He's bewildered. So he goes out of the palace onto the outside to the garden to calm down to think about what he should do. And he comes back, and meantime, Haman is terrified. So he throws himself on Esther to beg for mercy. And the king walks in and he sees Haman on top of his wife, top of his own wife. And it's like the Groucho Marx story. The guy comes in and sees a man in bed with his wife, Groucho in bed with his wife, and Groucho says, "Who are you going to believe, your eyes or me?" You know, Haman denies it. He said, "I was just throwing myself on her mercy." And Dr. Schwer says, "I saw you. You were on top of my wife. You were trying to commit adultery. You were trying to seduce her. You're finished. You're going to be executed." And what does Esther say? Nothing, not a word. She could have said, Your Majesty, you misunderstood. He wasn't trying to seduce me. But she doesn't say that. She could have said, Your Majesty, you're right. He was trying to seduce me. Give it a lie. But she doesn't say that. She says nothing. And therefore, he's taken out on his guilt. Why didn't she say something? The king thinks that because of what he saw, he's going to execute Haman. Let him. And look at the story of Rebekah. Isaac decides to give a blessing to Esau, and Rebekah is eavesdropping, and she hears about it. And so she goes through this whole rigmarole, disguises Jacob to look like Esau, makes a meal like the one Esau. Why didn't she just go into the room and say, Ike, or whatever she called him, Isaac? What are you doing? What are you doing? You can't give a blessing to Esau. He wouldn't understand what a blessing is. Take it from me. I know him better than you do. Don't do it. I ask you, if your husband was going to make out a will and give all his money to one of your children and then nothing to the other, and he didn't consult you, what would you do? What would you do? Anybody? My wife would give me a frusk that I would remember for a long time. I would say, are you an idiot? You're dividing our money without asking me? Why does Rebecca have to eavesdrop in order to find out? Because Rebecca, like Ahasuerus, like Adoniyahu, like Solomon, she's a woman. What do women know? What do women know about business? I'm smarter than she is. I'll decide how I divide my money. And she can't go in and tell him what she thinks. He doesn't care what she thinks. And therefore, she's got to go through this whole complicated business in order to get him to do what she wants. That's the world in which they lived. And that's the way the world is today. Do you remember how Nancy Reagan used to, during press conferences, look up at her husband with starry-eyed adoration? Only later did we find out that she had real power, that she believed in astrology, and she told him who to pick and who to fire on the base. We didn't know that. Never found out until later. Remember Edith Wilson? Woodrow Wilson had a stroke in his last years in office. Nobody was allowed to see him. She would carry the legislation into his bedroom, and she'd come out with it signed. And did he sign it? Did she sign it? Nobody ever knew. But let me give a lot of movies, 9 to 5, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. But the example I want to show you particularly is My Fair Lady. Do you remember the story? Dr. Henry Higgins, Rex Harrison, I think. Dr. Henry Higgins is the world's biggest expert on correct speech. And he and his friend happen to see a flower girl in the street. And this flower girl's accent, or Cockney accent, is so bad that you can hardly understand the word she says. And Higgins says to his friend, watch me. I'm going to take this girl who can't say a single sentence in English, and I'm going to educate her. Takes her home, trains her, 6 months, she's ready. Buys her a fancy dress, buys her fancy jewelry, and takes her to a royal ball. She gets there, nobody ever saw her. Who's that beautiful woman? And they all flock around her, and they all try to talk to her, and they all ask her questions, and she answers with royal dignity. And everybody in the room, including the language experts, is convinced she must be a royalty. They come home. Higgins is so happy and so proud of what he's accomplished. And as he walks in the door, he says, I did it. I did it. I did it. Hooray for me. And Eliza Doolittle is standing there in the corner. What do you mean I did it? Don't I deserve part of the credit? Don't I deserve part of the credit? And so he's very angry that he treats her like a puppet, a slave. He gets all the credit, she gets none. And she storms out of the building, slams the door behind her. And Higgins doesn't understand why is she upset. But he misses her. He misses her because now he has no maid. He has nobody to pick up his slippers, nobody to clean his house. And he misses her because she's very nice. And so he goes to his mother and says, Mom, can you tell me what happened, why she's mad? And his mother tells him, my son, you cannot treat a woman like a piece of furniture. You got to honor a woman. You got to thank her when she does something good. You got to treat her with respect. And at this point, Higgins sings the famous song, Why Can't a Woman Be More Like a Man? You don't send a man flowers when he does something right. You don't praise or flatter a man when just for doing his job. Why can't a woman be more like a man? Bathsheba could have told him why. One more example. Do you know the expression sock money? How many people here know the expression sock money? Nobody? One? Only one? Nobody else? Your parents knew the expression. In the old days, a woman would have sock money, money that she put away. She got change from the grocer, whatever. She sold something. She would put it away, hide it in her sock drawer, rather than turn it over to her husband. Because if she turned it over to her husband, if she wanted to buy something, she'd have to ask him for money. He controlled all the money in the house. She couldn't write a check. She didn't know what a check was. So that was called sock money. My favorite story about sock money comes from Dayton. I was there during the 6-Day War. We were trying to raise, I forget what the goal was, $5 million, whatever it was. And we were $25,000 short. And we'd already raised more than anybody thought was possible, more than had ever been raised in the history of Dayton Jury. And one woman got up, I remember her name, and she said, I give you $25,000 more from my sock money. And I always wonder what a big sock she must have had. But that idea that women have to hide money from their husbands because otherwise they'll have to ask permission to spend money. Your mothers would have understood that. Bathsheba would have understood that. Women today don't understand that. Women today can write checks. Women today can be bankers. Women today are stockbrokers. Women don't need to have sock money anymore. But this idea that a woman who is smarter than her husband has to hide her brains is still around. Let me give you 2 simple proofs. If you were tall, and if the guy who took you to the prom was shorter than you, what did your mother tell you to wear?
Flats.
Flats, Right. And if you had a Phi Beta Kappa key and your date did not, what did your mother tell you?
Hide it.
But you hide it, leave it home. You don't have to flaunt it. That's Batsheva thinking. And now let me give you an example from Israel. There's a poet in Israel named Yechiel Mor, and he comes from Jerusalem. And, Jerusalem is very different from Tel Aviv. You just drive into Jerusalem and you can feel the difference. Haifa is a socialist city. Tel Aviv is a working city. A large part, not all, but a large part of Jerusalem is a pious city where the Haredim live. And if you ever see the Haredim on the street, you'll see these women walking with long sleeves down to here, with long skirts down to here, with no makeup, with a tichel over her head, or maybe a sheitel, and pushing a baby carriage, and maybe pushing 2 baby carriages. And you look at her, she's no, I can think of a polite word. She's not, nobody that you're tempted to seduce. Listen to the poem called Batsheva by Yechiel Mor, who comes from that area, but who left it and still has a connection, a feeling for those who live there. He says, oh, the wiles of women. Women are so devious. Women are so tricky. Not for nothing did you climb onto the roof. I thought you took a bath in the bathtub, in the bathroom. Yechiel Mor says, no. She took her bath on the roof to make sure that he would see her. And your heart was wide. And there's a pun there. Rachav means wide. Your heart was wide open. And Rachav is the name of the first prostitute in the Bible in the time of Joshua. Your heart rejoiced. And the king's palace opposite you glistened enticingly. When you were taking that bath, you were, not for nothing did your clothes slithered down, you with the beautiful garment. You got undressed on the roof and you looked right across at the other roof, which was the palace, and it glistened. What does it mean the palace glistened? It shone, it was tempting, it's a beautiful house. I wish I could get in there. She did it on purpose. She wanted to attract the king's attention, but she wanted to get into the palace. And how do I get there? For many nights when sleep evaded you, you couldn't sleep because you were restless, full of lust, trying to figure out how can I get into the palace. For many nights when sleep evaded you, you spun the fabric of yearning with feverish desire. You interwove the warp of lust with the web of desire. The feminine metaphor. You sewed combination of desire and lust. Desire and fear. What if I get caught? And shivers came over you. Waves of lust and fear. On the one hand, I want to get there, and then I'm afraid to try. What will happen to me if I get there and get into trouble? And they catch me. Trying to get in, will I be arrested? Will I be sent to jail? Who knows what they'll do to me? So she sews with a mixture of lust and fear. Until the day when you put down your sewing equipment and picked up your arrow, the arrow that never misses. It switches from a feminine metaphor, the woman who sews, to a masculine metaphor, the woman who has a bow and arrow that never misses. And the torch of your body burned, and the king's fate was sealed. The day you shot your arrow at him, the king was finished. He couldn't resist you. The image of an army that surrounds the city until those that are in it have to surrender. She's going to get him. She's going to seal his fate. And if you get caught, you'll say what women always say when they're caught. The king seduced me. Understand? There are no witnesses. If you get caught, you'll say, he did it on me. It's a he said, she said case to say today. Nobody has any witnesses. If you get caught afterwards or before or during, what do you want from me? The king seduced me, and people will believe you. When it's over, if they ask how it happened, you will say, he did it, not me. That's what Mae West or Marilyn Monroe or any vamp would say in the future. She'll flutter her eyes and say, he seduced me. She's got her alibi ready. And Uriah, her husband, what about him? Him? No problem. Uriah, let him go to the javelin. Let him go to war and be killed. You think it was David's idea to write that letter to Joab saying put him in the front lines? It might have been Bathsheba's idea. We don't know. All we know is that he sent a letter. Who wrote it? We don't know. Maybe she wrote it so that she could get into the palace. Now, that's an interesting. None of us ever saw the story that way, and none of us would have ever understood the story that way in a million years, right? If you read the David Bathsheba story, would you think that she enticed him? Never. But she's figured it out. She's figured her out. She threw her spear and caught David, and she doesn't care about Uriah. She maybe doesn't even care about David. She only cares about herself. She only wants to become the queen. This is one tough lady. She's somebody that the Bible or the Talmud would not recognize. What does the story mean? Why does Yechiel Moore write this poem? Let me offer you, as I've done all night tonight, two possibilities. One possibility is that Yechiel Moore likes bold women. He agrees with Lady Gaga, Gertrude Lawrence. He likes Marilyn Monroe and Mae West and all the other women who know how to seduce men to get his money or to marry him. And who once they have him, once they have your credit card, they don't need you anymore. Once they've got your MRS, they got an MRS degree and they got your credit card, forget about it. Or Rachel Korsman, who's my teacher when it comes to Israeli poetry, who knows more about these things than I do, offers a different explanation. He says Yechiel Moore came out of the Orthodox world and feels a connection to it. And he feels a bit of sympathy for the women of that world, who are supposed to only do what their husbands tell them to do, and are supposed to walk around with long sleeves and long skirts and no makeup and a baby carriage, looking utterly unattractive so that nobody will ever seduce them. And he's saying in his poem, why can't a woman be like a man? Why can't a woman have erotic urges? Why can't they make advances when they want to, just like men do? Why can't a woman be more like a man? I would never have read the David Bathsheba story that way, but she may be right. This poem may be a declaration of women's right to have a body and to have urges and to go after the man she wants. And it may have been written in the hope that it would inspire the Haredi women of our time to learn from her. I don't know. But as we bid farewell to Bathsheba tonight now, let's honor her as the first woman who made her way in a man's world and who managed, we're not sure, but maybe, to make men do her will, and who managed to let them think that what she wanted them to think was their idea. And let me finish by telling all the women who are here tonight that if you have a husband who is not as smart as you are, don't tell him, don't mention it, but be like Bathsheba. Let him think that he's the smarter one. Because if you do, your marriage will be blessed and your husband will be happy. If your husband's happy, you'll be happy. One last word. We're meeting on Erev Shavuos. What does this whole story I've told you tonight have to do with Shavuos? I told you Nathan's speech to David is a commentary on the first of the 10 Commandments. If God is God, nobody else is God. But what's this got to do with Shavuos? You shouldn't commit adultery? Okay. I think what happened at Sinai, the whole Torah was not given at Sinai. The seeds of the Torah were given at Sinai. And it took a long, long, long time for some of those seeds to develop. The idea that all men should be free and nobody should be a slave, that didn't come to fruition until 1863, even though it was implied in the Torah. And the idea that women are equal to men and that they don't have to pretend that they're not, that idea that women and men are both made in God's image, that was a seed. The seed of that idea was planted at Sinai, but it didn't develop until our time. One of the great revolutions of our time, never heard of before, was the radical declaration that men and women are equal. Comes from Sinai, but it comes a long way from Sinai. And therefore, this Shavuos, I suggest that the women and the men, that all of us, be grateful for what happened at Sinai and what has grown out of what happened at Sinai, including the feminist revolution, what it is, what a revolution it is. Who would have imagined 100 years ago, woman could be a prime minister, woman could be a banker, woman could be a rabbi? Who would have dreamed that 100 years ago? Your grandparents would think you're crazy. But it came out of a seed planted at Sinai that we should celebrate on Shavuos. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Questions, comments? Anybody? I hope you stayed with me because it was over an hour. Let me repeat the two offers I made. Now, let me just repeat it. And I'm serious now about both. I'm not joking. One is, if you want me to come back and teach more Bible, I'll be happy to do so. And whatever you offer, no matter whatever you offer, the first offer I'll say that's ridiculous. And the second offer I'll accept whatever it is. Is that fair? Okay. And I said that to somebody, said, what if the second offer is lower than the first? And the second I offer, and this I'm also serious about, if you want to talk about Israel, what's going on there, and how we should understand it, and what we can do, if anything, about it, how we can help, and maybe even what the Bible says about it. You can invite me to do that anytime you want to, and I'll be happy to do it for free. Fair? That's my bottom price. Below free, I don't go. I have some pride. But if you want me to talk about what's happening in Israel, pick the time and I'll come and do it for free. But if you want me to talk to you about another chapter of the Bible, I'll be happy to do so anytime that you want. Any
Rabbi,
comments?
thank you. This was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. And I think Rabbi Danielle, Rabbi David, did you want to say something?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Rabbi Riemer is David White's man, and I just gave a few words before your last presentation, which I would like to say it was better than I expected, and I expected a lot. But this one I have similar feelings about, which is that you present things in a way that honors the complexity of the human being, and that our Tanakh, our Torah and our Tanakh help us to examine that.
Right.
We, you know, to say we come to grips with it would be, you know, unrealistic, but we're a people who struggle with these kinds of things.
Right. Very
And
good.
as what we have been experiencing in the past few days with what's going on in Israel, we have this like balancing act, as you said before,
Right.
of trying to deal with our emotions about what's going on, have still a sense of humility that we don't really understand all the factors,
Right.
and to go ahead and study something like we did this evening just bears that out, about how many factors there are that sometimes are so hidden to us that to jump to conclusions about why somebody did this or said that or is really myopic. And so
Thank you.
thank you.
And that's
Thank
certainly
you.
true of what's happening in Israel.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we really thank you for like
Um,
opening many doors for us, and we hope that we can take this feeling that you instilled in us to open our minds and our hearts for
Let me
many
just-
other things as well.
Let me just point this out to you. What's at stake in this war? I think Hamas is trying to replace the Palestinian Authority and win the hearts of the Jews, of the Arabs on the West Bank and in Jerusalem, and be their spokesman, to capture them as its followers. That's the real issue. Not to fight Israel. They're not looking to defeat Israel. They're looking to be the self-appointed representatives of people who until now have been peaceful. The Arab citizens of Israel until now have not been relatively peaceful. And that's their agenda. And the question is, how do we stop that? By going in, by not going in, there are all kinds of arguments. But they understand what their agenda is. It's not to fight Israel only, or even primarily. It's to become the representatives of the Arabs of Jerusalem, the self-appointed representatives of the Arabs of the West Bank, and to drive out the Palestinian Authority, which has been supportive and cooperative with Israel. And so that, if you invite me, we'll talk about all the complicated ways in which the same story can be read right now. What's Israel's real agenda? What's Hamas's real agenda? What's the agenda? They took one lousy court case, 6 Arab houses in Jerusalem. The court said cannot be taken now, but we have to study who really owns them. And they took a crazy, unfounded rumor that the Jews were going to take over the mosque, which where did it come from? Who planted that rumor? The last thing Jews would want to do. And those two events are what caused were the pretext that caused this whole incident. Once they began throwing rocks down from the mosque, the Israeli police went in. Once they went in with their cannons and their weapons, a lot of people got hurt and killed. And what was the alternative to that? And so that everybody has at least 2 agendas. And that's what we'll study if we have a chance to look at that situation. And we'll look at a passage in the Bible which deals with that question. What is appropriate in retaliation? What is not appropriate in retaliation? What works and what doesn't? And the Bible has a chapter that deals with that too, and maybe we'll get to study it, that question. When is enough enough? When is enough?
That would be
When is
good.
too much too much?
Rabbi, we would love
Anybody
to
have
have
any
you back.
questions?
to talk about that some more, but I think it'll have to wait till after Shavuos.
Okay, I wish you all a good Shavuos, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much.
I always say that my job is to talk, and yours is to listen, and I hope you don't finish before I do. Okay, good night and a good yunt.
No way.
Good night. Thank you. This was excellent.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Sarah, bye.
thank you.
Thank you very much. It was terrific.